A marriage that seemed to be the beginning of a romantic love story became the opening act for a shocking tragedy. In a peaceful small town, a mysterious bride and her scheming mother turned a wedding day into a bloody wedding season. A series of tragic deaths followed, pulling back the curtain on the secrets hidden behind the beautiful masks of two women. This isn't a fairy tale about love. It's a terrifying murder case, told chapter by chapter to expose the truth about a serial killer. Driven by a terrifying greed and cruelty, she murdered innocent people to protect a shocking secret and a pre-planned scam. Where will this chain of crimes end? It will all be revealed in a case where only life and death are the final options. The bloody wedding season. It was supposed to be a day of joy, a quiet small-town wedding that marked a new chapter for two disparate souls. On May 10th, 2010, the sleepy little town of Willow Creek, Illinois, known more for its sprawling cornfields than for drama, bore witness to an event that would forever stain its memory. The setting was the quaint and unassuming The Gilded Lily restaurant, its name a touch of elegance in an otherwise rustic landscape. The bride, Melody Chen, was a striking enigma. At just 20 years old, she was a vision of understated beauty, but her reserved demeanor and distant eyes set her apart. She spoke little, offering only clipped answers to the well-meaning townsfolk who tried to get to know her. Her mysterious past was a subject of hushed whispers. She had arrived in Willow Creek from an undisclosed, far-off place and lived a life seemingly detached from the world around her. She arrived alone on her wedding day, stepping out of a solitary taxi, a bride without a single family member in attendance. The groom, Michael Mike Turner, was the very picture of a Willow Creek native. A kind-hearted but simple mechanic, his hands were more accustomed to grease and gears than to the delicate intricacies of a new relationship. At 30, he was a man of routine and simple pleasures, and his love for Melody, though sincere, was a perplexing puzzle to his friends and family. The town found it hard to believe that this grounded, down-to-earth man had managed to capture the heart of such a beautiful, otherworldly woman. The reception was a modest affair, filled with the warmth of a close-knit community but tinged with an undercurrent of awkwardness. Mike's friends and family toasted the new couple, their laughter echoing through the small restaurant. Melody, however, remained a silent figure in the center of the celebration, a porcelain doll brought to life, accepting congratulations with a quiet nod and a strained smile. The festive atmosphere took a sudden, chilling turn when Melody's phone rang. Her face, which had been a mask of quiet composure, contorted with a mixture of shock and terror. She listened for a few moments, her hand trembling as she held the device to her ear. Leaning over to whisper to Mike, her voice was a breathy, frantic confession. "My mother. She's coming." The words hung in the air, a shocking revelation considering Melody had always claimed her mother was dead. Hours later, as the last of the guests trickled out, a figure materialized on the doorstep of the newlyweds' small home. The woman who stood there was a breathtaking study in contradictions. Victoria Vicky Chen, as she introduced herself, was strikingly young for a mother, with a seductive beauty that belied her age. But it was her eyes that truly captivated. Cold and sharp as shards of glass, they held a dangerous intelligence. Her clothes were disheveled and dirty, a stark contrast to her otherwise flawless appearance. She spun a tale of being robbed on her way to the wedding, a flimsy excuse that left her looking disheveled but somehow still in control. Despite the obvious inconsistencies and the bizarre nature of her appearance, a polite but bewildered Mike invited her in. He had no way of knowing that with that simple gesture he wasn't just welcoming a guest into his home. He was opening the door to a living nightmare. The quiet life he once knew was about to be shattered, and the peaceful town of Willow Creek would soon be transformed into a hunting ground. A deadly game had begun, and Mike, his new bride, and her mysterious mother were at its very center, ghosts of the past. The days following the wedding descended into a claustrophobic existence for Mike. The serene simplicity of his life was replaced by a suffocating tension, all thanks to the arrival of Victoria. Her presence in his small home was a constant, unsettling force. Like a silent predator lurking just out of sight, Mike found himself on edge, his peaceful sanctuary transformed into a battleground of whispered arguments and palpable hostility. He constantly caught fleeting glimpses of her, rifling through his personal papers, her movements swift and secretive. The discovery that his financial documents had been tampered with and his bank statements suspiciously scrutinized sent a shiver of unease down his spine. The most unnerving moments, however, were the arguments he would overhear between Victoria and Melody. The two women, mother and daughter in name, seemed more like co-conspirators. He would catch snippets of their conversations, frantic, hushed debates about the money and the deal. These fragmented pieces of dialogue painted a disturbing picture, one that made Mike's heart sink with the dawning realization that his marriage might be nothing more than a carefully constructed sham. Was he just a pawn in some elaborate scheme? A means to an end for these two beautiful, cold women? The first drop of blood fell on May 12th. Leo Finch. Mike's colleague and closest friend was found dead in his apartment. Leo was a man with a nose for trouble, and he had been the first to express his misgivings about Melody. He had pulled Mike aside at the wedding, his voice low and urgent, to warn him that something wasn't right about his new bride. Now, Leo was gone. The police report detailed a gruesome scene. Death by strangulation, a vicious garrote mark on his neck, and a strange, ritualistic-looking cut on his hand. The most chilling discovery, however, was a small, delicate women's shoe left at the crime scene, a size that matched Melody's. Just 2 days later, the macabre pattern repeated itself. Paul Rivera. Leo's landlord was found murdered in his car. His body was a testament to a ferocious struggle, with multiple stab wounds piercing his chest. Mr. Rivera was known for his stubborn nature and had recently threatened to evict Leo over unpaid rent. He had also told Leo he planned to report a mysterious woman he had seen coming and going from the apartment to the police. Once again, the police found a key piece of evidence. Another small women's shoe, a twin to the one found at Leo's apartment. The evidence was piling up, and all of it pointed to a killer who was both meticulous and brutal. The peaceful veneer of Willow Creek was shattering. What began as a day of celebration had spiraled into a waking nightmare, and the specter of death was now a very real and present threat. Mike felt a cold dread settle in his gut. The unsettling questions he had about his wife and her mother were no longer just whispers of suspicion. They were becoming a terrifying reality, one that was claiming the lives of the people closest to him. The demon's thirst. The quiet dread that had settled over Willow Creek exploded into sheer terror on May 18th. The third victim. Danny Hughes was a close acquaintance of Mike's, a fellow mechanic who worked alongside him. Danny was a garrulous man, and he was known for his loose lips and his uncanny ability to pick up on the town's gossip. He had made a point of pulling Mike aside, his voice conspiratorial and filled with a dangerous mix of excitement and fear, hinting that he knew the secret about Mike's marriage. He even bragged about overhearing a heated argument between the mother and daughter, a secret he clearly thought would make him a wealthy man. That day, his body was found in the storage room of the auto shop, the very place where Mike and Danny spent their days. His corpse was a brutal sight, a fatal stab wound to the neck, a gash so precise it could only be the work of someone with cold, calculated intent. The killer had left no trace, but the police knew this wasn't just a random act of violence. The pattern was becoming frighteningly clear. Detective Grant Harrison. A seasoned investigator who had served the community for decades, took charge of the case. He was a man of quiet determination, and he immediately saw the common thread connecting the victims. They were all men connected to Mike, and they had all been murdered shortly after expressing suspicion or gaining knowledge about Melody and Victoria. The evidence from each crime scene, the small shoe prints, the specific choice of a garrote or a knife, all pointed to one singular conclusion. The killer was a woman. Detective Harrison formulated a terrifying theory. This was a calculated and brutal cleanup operation, a series of assassinations meant to silence anyone who threatened to expose the truth. The spree of violence, however, was far from over. A day after Danny's murder, on May 19th, the body of Chloe Evans was discovered. Chloe was a young woman who had worked for a local notary, and police found her stabbed multiple times in a rented room. Her death was a brutal, personal affair, a testament to a killer's rage. Detective Harrison and his team quickly learned that Chloe had helped Melody and Victoria forge documents, and she had recently demanded more money for her services. She had bragged to a friend that she had enough information to expose the two women and make a fortune. It seemed she had known too much, and for a killer driven by greed and a ruthless desire for control, knowing too much was a death sentence. With each new body, the people of Willow Creek began to turn their eyes toward Mike's new family. The once quiet, mysterious bride and her stunning mother were no longer just subjects of gossip. They were now objects of fear. The town had become the backdrop for a monster, a creature in human skin who hunted its prey with cold, unfeeling precision, leaving a trail of death in its wake. The question on everyone's mind was no longer who the killer was, but rather, who would be next? The web and the confession. The sudden disappearance of Melody after Danny's death was not a coincidence. It was a cold, calculated move, a desperate attempt to sever a connection that was becoming a noose around their necks. Detective Harrison, a man whose patience was as legendary as his intuition, immediately put both Melody and Victoria on the wanted list. He knew the women were running, but he also knew that their greed was a powerful magnet. Victoria, however, was not the type to panic. She faced police questioning with an almost theatrical calm, her beautiful face a mask of feigned innocence. Her story was a well-rehearsed web of half-truths and alibis that crumbled under the slightest pressure. She claimed to have been nowhere near any of the crime scenes, but her conflicting statements and vague timeline only deepened Harrison's suspicion. He could see the lies behind her stunning eyes and knew they were dancing on the edge of a breakthrough. Desperate to catch a killer who was always one step ahead, Detective Harrison devised a risky plan. He turned to the one person who could lure the women out of hiding, Mike. The simple mechanic, now a man haunted by the deaths of his friends, agreed to the dangerous bait. He was to pretend to have had enough, to want an amicable divorce, and to offer Melody a final tempting olive branch, half ownership of his home. It was a perfect trap, designed to appeal to the very thing that drove them, money. The bait worked. Greed, a force more powerful than caution, proved to be their downfall. Melody, blinded by the prospect of a new life with a secure financial foundation, took the bait. She showed up at the designated meeting place, an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, her face a mix of suspicion and avarice. The police, hidden in the shadows, watched as she entered the building. It was a short, violent struggle. Mike, filled with a righteous fury, born from grief and betrayal, helped to subdue her. Melody was a fighter, but she was no match for the combined force of a heartbroken man and the police who were waiting for her. In the sterile confines of the interrogation room, the truth began to unravel. Melody, exhausted and terrified, her bravado gone, finally broke. She confessed her true name was Sarah, and began to lay out the chilling details of their crimes. She painted a picture of a life of deception, of a mother who was not just a partner in crime, but a ruthless monster. Sarah admitted her role was to lure men into their web of lies, but she swore the killing was all Victoria's doing. She revealed that Victoria had threatened her, promising to kill her if she ever betrayed their agreement. The web of deception, which had started with a quiet wedding, was now exposed as a partnership fueled by betrayal, lies, and a cold-blooded thirst for murder. The puzzle pieces were finally falling into place, and the full scope of their horrific crimes was about to be revealed. The bloody hand. With Sarah's chilling confession, Detective Harrison had all the leverage he needed. The full scope of the conspiracy had been laid bare, a trail of deceit and murder stretching from the wedding day to the present. The only remaining piece was the mastermind herself. Just as they had with Sarah, the police used Mike as a lure, baiting the trap with the one thing they knew Victoria couldn't resist, a final, large sum of money. Mike once again agreed to play his part, his grief and rage now replaced by a chilling calm. The plan was set in motion. Mike contacted Victoria, feigning a desperate desire to get out of town and offering to give her the money in exchange for their final separation. He proposed a meeting at an old abandoned warehouse by the river, a place he knew well, and a location where the police could surround her without her knowing. Driven by a mix of arrogance and insatiable greed, Victoria took the bait. She was so convinced of her own cleverness, so sure she could outsmart everyone, that she walked right into the ambush. She arrived at the warehouse, her poise never wavering, a predator in a perfectly tailored disguise. As soon as she saw Mike, she pulled out a knife, holding him hostage. It was the perfect moment for the police to strike. The tactical team, hidden in the surrounding darkness, moved in with a flash of lights and a chorus of shouts. Victoria, for the first time, was cornered. She fought, her movements shockingly swift and violent, but she was quickly overwhelmed. The knife clattered to the floor as she was taken into custody. At the police station, the web of lies she had woven began to unravel completely. Forensic teams, armed with the evidence from Sarah's confession, matched Victoria's DNA and fingerprints to every single crime scene. The small women's shoes left behind at the first two murders were a perfect match. A strand of her hair was found on Danny Hughes's body. The evidence was irrefutable. Faced with a mountain of proof, Victoria's cold composure finally broke. The mask of a demure, innocent woman slipped away, revealing the sociopath beneath. She confessed to it all, her voice as flat and emotionless as a machine. She detailed each murder with chilling precision, a gruesome chronicle of a 2-week killing spree. She admitted to strangling Leo Finch, using a garrote to silence his suspicions. She confessed to stabbing Paul Rivera to death, describing how she had taken advantage of his drunken state to overpower him. She recounted how she slit Danny Hughes's throat, a single precise cut that ensured his silence. She even confessed to killing Chloe Evans, admitting she saw the young woman's attempt at blackmail as a threat that had to be eliminated. As she recounted her crimes, there was no remorse, no flicker of human emotion. Victoria simply saw her victims as obstacles, stepping stones on her path to a life of wealth and luxury. The murders were just a means to an end, a grim necessity in her grand scheme. The quiet little town of Willow Creek had become the stage for a brutal play, all because of one woman's bottomless greed. Final chapter: The Hellish Vortex. The trial of Victoria Chen was a national sensation, a grim spectacle that captivated the nation. The once sleepy town of Willow Creek became a media circus, its quiet streets now lined with news vans and reporters hungry for every gruesome detail. Victoria, still as stunning and cold as the day she arrived, showed no remorse. She sat in the courtroom with a detached air, as if the parade of witnesses and the mountain of evidence had nothing to do with her. Sarah, now known by her real name, was a key witness, her testimony painting a vivid and terrifying picture of a life spent in her mother's shadow. The jury needed only 2 hours to reach a verdict: guilty on all counts of murder. Victoria Chen was sentenced to death, a fate she met with an almost bored shrug. Sarah's fate was less absolute. The court, acknowledging her role as a reluctant accomplice, sentenced her to a long prison term for fraud and conspiracy to commit murder. She was a woman who had spent her life under her mother's thumb, a co-conspirator who had been as much a victim of Victoria's manipulation as anyone else. Her prison cell was a lonely place, a cold, hard end to a life built on lies. And then there was Mike. He had survived the ordeal, but he was not a man who could ever truly escape. The love he had once felt for Melody had been a carefully constructed illusion, a cruel trick that had led to the deaths of his friends. Every day he was haunted by their faces, the vibrant men he had once known, now just ghosts in his memory. The small home he had once shared with his new bride was now an empty, echoing tomb, a constant reminder of the nightmare he had lived. He was a survivor, but he was also a prisoner of his past, condemned to live with the knowledge that his own love had been a weapon in a killer's hands. The story of Victoria and Sarah Chen became a cautionary tale, a chilling warning, broadcast on every news channel. Victoria, the beautiful woman with a killer's heart, had been driven by a bottomless greed that had consumed her entirely. She was a living testament to how easily evil can hide behind a beautiful face, how a charming facade can mask a soulless interior. The events of those 2 weeks would forever be etched into the history of Willow Creek, a scar on the town's collective memory. The bloody wedding became a dark legend, a reminder that the most terrifying monsters are not born of myth and folklore, but are human beings, walking among us with a thirst for blood and a hunger for more.